Albert Rosales, a Florida law enforcement officer who spends his time compiling UFO cases involving humanoids, was contacted by a member of the Louisiana National Guard with regards to a bizarre incident that occurred in the second week of June 1994. The man, who went by the initials GC, claims that on the third day of his 2-week training exercise at Fort Polk in Louisiana, found himself placed on restricted duty and forced to remain at the barracks after he contracted an intense case of poison ivy. At around 9 p.m. he turned in for the night. 12:30 a.m. GC woke to the phone ringing. It was a message for Sergeant Warner. GC relayed the message to the sergeant and then returned to his cot. At 12:45, the phone rang again. It wasn't until 12:50 a.m. when he finally got back to bed. Laying on his back, he folded his arms across his chest and closed his eyes. Just then, a magnificent flash of light startled him. He opened his eyes and listened intensely. He assumed that one of the guys was attempting to pull a practical joke on another soldier. He heard nothing and decided to shrug it off. He closed his eyes again, and suddenly there was another flash of light. This time he became somewhat concerned and decided to go outside and see what was going on. Armed with a flashlight, he proceeded to check the perimeter, but found no one. He went inside and returned to his bed. As he lay on his side, he observed another flash of light. Highly unnerved by this, he kept his eyes open and watched for anything suspicious. It was then he noticed how quiet it had suddenly gotten. He could not hear anything. It was June, so the crickets were out in force, but as he lay there, he could not hear them. He could hear nothing at all. He looked at his watch and noticed that it was now 1 a.m. After looking at his watch, the flash occurred again, a fourth time. He saw it this time. Looking out the window, he could see it. From one corner of the sky to the other, it was lit up with the, quote, brightest, most magnificent white light I have ever seen, unquote. The event lasted a split second and then was gone. Then there was silence. Too silent. It was almost eerie. GC strained his ears, listening for what it could have been. Soon he heard the landline ring again, and when he picked it up, it was the Sergeant Leonard telling GC that he was late to the Tactical Operations Center. GC found this odd, as it was only 1 a.m., and he still had plenty of time to nap and head over. It was then he looked at his watch and realized it was already 3 a.m. GC was shocked. He simply could not explain the strange lapse of time, as he was certain that he had not slept in between looking at his watch and seeing the light flashes. He later asked around if anyone else had seen the mysterious flashes, but no one else apparently had. A couple of days later, as GC was exercising, he discovered an 1.5 long by 3 by 1/16 of an inch wide burn on the inside portion of his left forearm. He had no idea how it had gotten there. Later, at his parents', who lived about 4 hours away from Fort Polk, his mother told him that his father had a similar burn mark and had also noticed a huge flash on Sunday night at around 3 a.m. that seemed to have lit up the whole sky. It wasn't until March 1995 when GC began remembering the events of that night after having a series of weird dreams. His memories included waking up on a cold table that, to him, felt like stainless steel. He was unable to move and was naked except for a sheet which was draped over his groin and midsection. He sensed there were other people in the room around him, but he could only pivot his eyes and couldn't get a look at anyone. It was then that someone walked up to GC, coming from his right side, and placed his hand on the nape of his neck. GC recalled feeling 3 points of pressure against his neck, in the center and along the top of his spine. It was then he went from being completely horizontal to more inclined. From this angle, he could see his feet, and he could see what was beyond that. Standing in front of him were a group of people. He guessed there was about 9 to 11 of them. They were lined up in a crescent shape around the table. They were staring at him, emotionless. As GC focused on them, he began to realize that, although they looked human, there was something off about them. First off, they were short. All of them stood about 4 to 4.5 feet tall. They all had blank expressions on their faces, and they were all identical to each other. They all had black hair which appeared messy and tangled. Even more chilling, they all had solid black eyes. There were no whites in those eyes. They wore one-piece gray coverall suits with sleeves that only went down to the middle of their forearms. There also seemed to be a buckle or something resembling one. GC could not see their hands clearly. As GC examined them, he sensed that they were totally unemotional. They exhibited no characteristics of what GC would consider human, outside of the fact that they had 4 limbs and walked upright. One of the beings then stepped forward and touched the bottom of GC's right foot. GC still couldn't move, but he could hear. Once the being did whatever was needed to his right foot, GC recalled that everything sounded as if it was underwater. This is when his memory takes an even stranger turn, as GC next recalled looking down at himself from above. To GC, it was as if he was suspended in the air, and he could see all the beings surrounding the table where he was laying, all hunched over doing things to him. Though he was suspended in the air, GC realized he still could not move. Not unlike a ghost, GC was only able to observe. GC at some point watched as the beings performed a type of transfusion on him. They drained his blood and, in its place, put in water. This frightened GC, who suddenly became aware of the fact that he could speak. At that moment, he also realized that something or someone was next to him, but, try as he might, he simply could not turn to look at it. GC attempted to speak to whoever was next to him. "How is this possible? I am dead. You took out my blood and put in water. I am dead, right?" The being next to him replied simply, "We put something in you to make you live." It is unclear if this message was delivered verbally or telepathically. This was GC's last memory of that event. This is a very interesting case in that it not only mentions the weird light flashing phenomenon I have mentioned in previous videos, but it also involves a possible alien abduction from a secure military installation. GC's recall of the event also suggests a possible OBE, or near-death-like experience, which occurred in conjunction with an alien abduction. What the beings were doing to him is also up for debate. "We put something in you to make you live" seems on the surface an explanation for why GC could remain conscious and alive, albeit out of his body, after the transfusion. But what if the being was speaking in more broader terms? What if he was suggesting they were attempting to save his life via the operation? Is it possible that the beings, in their examination of him, discovered a type of strange blood disorder or other health concern, and they were attempting to save his life? It's just one explanation. Another thing I found interesting was that GC described them as human-looking, but with jet black eyes. This is just another in a long line of cases which connects human-looking black-eyed beings to the UFO phenomenon.